Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil Code Veronica X no damage walkthrough, and this is Chris' section on Rockfort Island, and we are about to have a boss fight, which is a pretty dumb boss fight. So the way this works is, wait for him to appear, and then when you see him moving underground, move so that you're not in his path, fire at him with the bowgun once he emerges, and then just shoot him. Sounds very simple, but the biggest problem is that this boss fight is completely random, and it's random for several reasons. The first reason is that there's no guarantee that the gulp worm is going to just stay above ground, or he's just going to just immediately burrow back into the ground. And when he decides to burrow back into the ground, you can't kill him. You can damage him, but you can't actually kill him. The only way to kill this guy is for him to actually do an attack that allows him to remain above ground, and then you shoot him then, and then he dies. And then the second thing is that randomly, when he's doing an attack, there will be rubble that will come down from the ceiling, and the rubble can actually hit you after you kill the boss, and the hitboxes on the rubble are not very good. So that boss, even though he dies very fast from the bowgun, it's a pretty crappy boss fight. I was able to actually kill that boss knife only without taking any damage, and it is on my channel, but nobody has bothered to check it out, which is very strange, because everyone's been checking out my Plane Tyrant videos and my videos against Nosferatu, but surprisingly, not that video, which you would think would get more views considering how random that fight is, but apparently not. But I'm now going to take the pistol and the grenade launcher with me, and I'm also going to put away the knife, because you don't need the knife for Rockfort Island as Chris. And the knife can be helpful in saving ammunition. In fact, Chris knifes differently compared to Claire. Or not really knifes differently, it's more so he just looks at the ground more compared to Claire. Oh, by the way, there's going to be a bunch of spiders coming out of the vents over here, but they're so easy to get past because this first spider, if you don't move for a second, he will always go to the right. So you just gotta hug the left-hand side of where the camera is, and then just run. Simple. That works consistently every single time, so just do that instead of shooting them. And something I should actually mention about this particular recording, this is actually my second recording of this section, because something really stupid happened, and it was entirely my fault. I successfully did Rockfort Island as Chris, without taking any damage, and I was originally going to use it for my walkthrough, but rather than do the editing process for this video, I decided to record the final part of Chris' section, which was the Antarctic base, because I was originally going to link the videos together, and something really dumb happened. So I was trying to figure out how to do the final phase of Alexia very quickly without having to rely too much on waiting, just to wait for the right moment to shoot Alexia with the linear launcher. So I was taking damage, and I was trying to see if there was a pattern to her movement, and like an idiot, without thinking, I decided to fire the linear launcher randomly, and it accidentally hit Alexia. So because of this, I had to re-record the whole entire Antarctic base section as Chris. So I deleted my original recording of the Antarctic base, but in the process of doing so, I accidentally deleted my original recording of Rockfort Island, so I had to re-record this whole entire section of Rockfort Island again, and that's why you're seeing me just breeze through a lot of these sections very quickly, because I knew exactly what I was doing. And now, at this point, I'm just gonna do only Rockfort Island, and then I'll just save the final part for the next video, because I didn't want to have to put up with all that again, or even run the risk of potentially deleting my re-recording of Rockfort Island. I will say, though, Chris's whole entire section of Code Veronica takes up roughly 50 minutes to an hour to do, and that's including all of the loading screens. I bet without all of those loading screens, it's roughly like 30 minutes to 40 minutes worth of content. So, overall, Chris's entire section on Code Veronica is a very short part of the game. By the way, after picking up the Clement Epsilon, I'm going to use the grenade launcher to clear out a bunch of hunters. So immediately hold R1 and press X, and then press L1, and then just fire your grenade launcher, and you will instantly kill these hunters. Hunters have to be relatively close to you, so that they die instantly from the grenade launcher. And now that I have the doorknob, I'm going to be able to head over to the second floor, and I will be able to gain access to the diorama. And I'll take the time to explain how this whole entire section is going to work. So, you see right there, there's that shotgun on the wall. I'm not going to pick it up until I leave this whole entire section, because the shotgun is completely pointless for this whole entire section. You only really need to rely on your pistol and the grenade launcher. And you notice that I'm using the grenade rounds very freely, because you don't really need the grenade rounds that much. I mean, obviously you'll need the grenade rounds against hunters, but the grenade rounds don't really benefit you that much in the final part of the game, or even for this section. So I know I'm going to get back a bunch of grenade rounds for this whole entire section and also for the final part. So that's yet another reason why I'm deciding to use grenade rounds as freely as I am. And I was also experimenting with acid rounds and incendiary rounds to see if they elicited very different kinds of effects on different types of hunters. And what I noticed is that the damage on acid rounds and incendiary rounds is very inconsistent on the hunters. Oh, and by the way, that drone, if it spots you, it will spot a hunter. But that drone is completely pointless because when you get to that part of the room and the camera is at that position, when the drone spots you, the hunter will appear off-screen from the door you just came through to get back into that room. So I know I'm not going to be able to go back into that room because there's no need to. So that drone is completely pointless for having to backtrack out of that room. And now I have the turntable key, so I'm going to head back to the basement. And this is where you need to pick up the incendiary rounds. There's a pattern to how you're supposed to pick up the ammo. You need these incendiary rounds to kill a Bandersnatch, and this is the only Bandersnatch you're going to be coming across. So thank God for that, because I don't like the Bandersnatches on this game and their ability to cheat sometimes. And normally, Bandersnatches are supposed to die instantly from incendiary grenades, but on this recording, it takes 2 incendiary grenades to kill this one Bandersnatch. It's almost like when he's in an attack animation, he gains some weird properties that allow him to resist the instant kill properties of the incendiary grenades. Oh, and look at this. This is a great example of the kind of humiliation Chris went through in Resident Evil Code Veronica at the hands of Wesker. You have no idea how close Wesker came to actually killing Chris in this part, and he got saved by a lucky pass by Alexia, because randomly Alexia just appears on a screen, which doesn't make any sense. And then this prompts Wesker to just throw Chris away. Yeah, it sounds so stupid thinking about it. I'm so glad that Chris decided to go through intense training just to avoid any kind of lucky pass moments with Wesker. I mean, he had to match himself with Wesker, because there's no physical way that Chris would be able to match Wesker at his current capabilities at this point in time. I mean, that one blow alone that sent Chris flying into the wall should have been enough to kill him, but somehow that didn't kill him, and then getting choked at that should have been enough to kill him, but thankfully Alexia saved him, which is so dumb. Yeah, I'm so glad Resident Evil 5 Chris existed, so that, you know, he couldn't get into any kind of lucky pass moments like that, and the fact that he pre-prepared for this situation by bringing Sheva along, and by mastering different weaponry, and by understanding how to engage in hand-to-hand combat, that really saved Chris in the end in Resident Evil 5. Not some kind of lucky pass moment, thankfully. So I'm gonna say it again. Wesker's actions in Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil Code Veronica were definitely essential for Chris to find the motivation necessary to become who he was in Resident Evil 5 and therefore destroy Wesker. So Wesker was his own undoing in the end. That's my reasoning for it, and it just makes so much sense. Because that's just the evolution of survival horror. That's just the evolution of characters in survival horror when, you know, they've seen it all. You know, that's why Chris said in Resident Evil 7, it's just another monster. That's just how desensitized he was to a lot of the violence of bioterrorism. And that's just how capable he was of fighting BOWs at that point, all thanks to Wesker. And this right here is pretty dangerous. You've got to make sure you're holding R1 once the door animation is complete, so that you can immediately lock onto that hunter, wait for him to get close to you, and then press X to fire at him, and then you've just got to turn while Chris is loading the grenade launcher so that you can kill that other hunter. And going back to what I said about acid rounds and incendiary rounds doing inconsistent damage against the hunters, they also elicit different knockback capabilities, and it's random as well, because there are times when acid rounds can knock over hunters, but then there are other times when they don't knock over hunters, and I think it has to do with the range that they're fired at. I think you have to fire the acid rounds at mid-range for them to actually knock over hunters, and it's the same with the incendiary rounds. And the first time I used incendiary rounds against a hunter, I didn't see any kind of knockback. It did not die after a single incendiary round, so I thought the incendiary rounds were pretty useless, and then I saw the acid rounds, and then the acid rounds knocked over the first hunter that I fired at, and it took 2 shots from the acid rounds to kill a hunter. Oh, and by the way, the puzzle here is 335, empty, 335. That's the solution here. That's why I sped it up, it's very simple. But the next time I decided to fire my acid rounds at a hunter, it didn't knock it over, which was very strange. And then I also had another moment where the acid rounds instantly killed a hunter. So, I have no idea how the damage and the stun values work for the enemy types on this game, but my guess is it has to do with the range. You have to be at mid-range from a hunter in order to actually knock them over and potentially instantly kill them. Because you'll see right here, watch this. I'm going to equip the acid rounds because I know there's a hunter coming up. And I'm just going to wait for the camera to swap, and I'm going to fire. And that killed the hunter instantly. I have no idea how that worked, but it's something that really bothers me because it just leads to a certain distrust when it comes to trusting your weapons. And much like the hunters, I wonder if there are other enemies that display this kind of inconsistent behavior when it comes to responding to being hit by certain weapons. And this is probably why I feel like the acid rounds and the incendiary rounds aren't really that good in this game. Even though they do have some applications, but that's just it. Some applications. Like, they're not useful for the full entire game. They're only useful for very specific sections. And I just could not find a lot of reason to use them, aside from just clearing out a bunch of enemies that were really close to me after a loading screen. Oh, and this right here is a very unique section, because you can actually stealth past this hunter and not have to deal with them. Because if you just stay behind him and he doesn't see you, he will never attack you. Even when you're sprinting, he never tries to attack you, as long as you stay behind him. And I'm going to gather up the proofs, because you're going to be using these proofs to gain access to the Albinoid boss fight. But it's not really a boss fight, because all the Albinoid does is just stay in the water, and he's only ever a threat when you yourself are in the water. So he's practically a fish in a barrel. All you gotta do is just wait for him to get to a particular spot in his area, and then just shoot him. Simple. The upgraded pistol absolutely devastates him, and the submachine guns do the exact same thing as well. Oh, right here, I'm going to use the acid rounds to get rid of these two sweepers. So I fire the acid round immediately upon loading into the room, and then I press L1 to lock onto the second sweeper, and then press L1 again to lock back onto the first sweeper, because it takes him roughly 3 seconds to get up off the ground, and then I kill him, and then I kill the other sweeper. That's probably the hardest part of Chris's section of Rockfort Island, because dealing with enemies that are so close to you can be very tricky if you don't have the right resources. And after seeing what the acid rounds can do against hunters, acid rounds were definitely a pretty good choice for that particular section. I wonder if the BOW gas grenades can do anything against those sweepers. Because from what I've heard, BOW gas grenades are pretty powerful against a lot of the enemy types on Resident Evil Code Veronica. I believe they can actually instantly kill a lot of different enemy types. And I actually learned where the BOW gas grenades are. So the BOW gas grenades are located in the room that has the metal detectors. Speaking of the room with the metal detectors, I actually saw on Carcinogen SDA's No Damage video that you can actually prevent the zombies from busting through the windows if you trigger the lockdown by trying to pass metal objects through the metal detectors, then making the emblem using the special alloy, and when you disable the lockdown, the zombies will never try to bust through the windows, which was really cool, and I love to know that on my first video. It was really surprising when I learned about these two different things. So, maybe the gas grenades will actually help out for certain situations. I mean, I know everybody uses the gas grenades against the Plane Tyrant, but with the strategies that I've already laid out in this walkthrough against the Plane Tyrant, you can use the gas grenades for different parts of the game, and not just for the Plane Tyrant section. So, I bet the BOW gas grenades are going to be really helpful against those two sweepers. That'll be very interesting to see how effective they are against sweepers and hunters. So for this part, make sure you have the normal grenades equipped, because there's a hunter in the next room. And same thing as before, hold R1 when you're in the loading screen, and you will automatically lock on to that guy. And then you will instantly kill him because he's very close to you. And then right there, I was very confused as to why you couldn't pick up those grenade rounds. But right there, I should have been able to pick it up if I didn't decide to fire these incendiary rounds. So yeah, this was probably a big mistake on my part, but in reality it doesn't really make that much of a difference, because like I've already mentioned, I just could not find any real use for the incendiary grenades for the rest of the game, because the grenade launcher is practically overshadowed by the shotgun and also the bow gun with the explosive bolts. I mean, the grenade launcher will still be useful against certain hunters later on, and against certain sweepers, but once you get the Magnum, you pretty much have all the weapons you need to beat the game. Although, in all honesty, I only ever used the Magnum against one sweeper, and then the rest of the Magnum rounds I just used to kill off any stragglers. I don't use the Magnum against any of the boss fights later on, because the first form of Alexia can be done knife only, and it's a lot of fun to do. And then, with the final form of Alexia, the Magnum is completely useless. It won't elicit enough hit stun to stop Alexia from doing certain attacks. Only the explosive bolts from the bowgun can stop her from doing her attacks, because you can fire them very fast, and they have a very high DPS. So, the only weapons I really use for the final form of Alexia are the bowgun and the shotgun. Those are the only two weapons you need for that boss fight. But we're about to gain access to the Albinoid boss fight using the 3 proofs. But before that point, we gotta dodge 2 spiders, and the spiders are very easy to get past because they're already on the ceiling. And if there's one key trait to note about every single spider in the Resident Evil series, is that they are so passive when they're on ceilings and when they're on walls. They never hit you. It's only when they're on the ground that they can be a problem. You see, look, they're so slow. And we have now gained access to the Albinoid boss fight, which, as I've already mentioned, is not really a boss fight. It's about as pointless as a Centurion boss fight from Resident Evil 0, because both of these fights are not really threatening to you whatsoever. But there are 2 attacks that this guy can do if you decide to go into the water. The main attack that this guy likes to do is an AoE shockwave, where he shocks the whole entire water, and of course, you know, water conducts electricity greatly, and it does a lot of damage to you. And then the second attack that he can do is a melee attack, and a lot of speedrunners, when they're trying to do knife only, they try to get him to do his melee attack. It's just, I don't know how to bait it out. And when he does the melee attack, he is going to try to follow you, he's going to take a lot of sharp turns, but with how slow he is to do the melee attack sometimes, it makes it very easy for people to pick up the blue emblem, and they don't have to run the risk of him doing the AoE attack and just shocking you. And compared to Resident Evil 0, you do not get iframes when you are picking up objects. It's the same case with the other Resident Evil games before Resident Evil Code Veronica. They decided to change this with Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 0, which is a really good thing. Although, this was more of an advantage in Resident Evil 0, because in Resident Evil 0, you could put items on the ground. You didn't have any kind of item box system, so to accommodate for that, they allowed you to drop items on the ground in any room. And this gave a lot of people the advantage of iframes, and that whole trick of picking up items so that you could gain iframes was especially helpful in no damaging the final boss fight of Resident Evil 0. If you haven't seen my walkthrough of Resident Evil 0, you should definitely check it out. The kind of strategies that I used against the final boss fight of Resident Evil 0 was so tense. I was panicking the whole time when I was trying to no damage that whole entire final boss fight. It was quite an experience, let me tell you. But this is the end of Rockfort Island. All we gotta do is just grab the shotgun and then take this shortcut back to that doorway that we can use the golden axe on. And look, once again, spiders are so passive when they're on ceilings. And we have gained access to the Antarctic base, which isn't that bad in all honesty. I definitely think this whole entire area is very easy when you're doing it as Chris. You know, I really feel like Part 2 of this game is incredibly easy compared to Part 1, because you have all the tools necessary to beat the game, and you're not really fighting a lot of enemies. Oh, in fact, I just realized something. I don't use the Magnum to clear out a bunch of stragglers. I use the Magnum to get rid of a boss in the Antarctic base, and it's the giant spider. The Magnum absolutely destroys that particular boss enemy. I think it dies in roughly 4 to 5 shots, which just goes to show how powerful the Magnum is on this game. It's just a shame that the Magnum isn't really that powerful against Alexia's final form. But you might be wondering, where the heck did that giant spider come from? Well, if you remember, back when we did the Antarctic base as Claire, there was a room that had 3 spiders, and one of the spiders was below the floor. And that spider actually mutates into the giant spider because of the gas that we expelled into that room, thanks to the crate that we sent. And this is actually a nod back to Resident Evil 2, because in Resident Evil 2, Plant 43 and the Ivies, they were all mutated by the P-Epsilon gas, and they developed an immunity to the P-Epsilon gas. And it was very interesting hearing Carcinogen SDA point that out, because that's just a really nice connection between this game and Resident Evil 2 when it comes to the P-Epsilon gas. So, that's the gas that we're firing from the BOW grenades. It's the P-Epsilon gas from Resident Evil 2. It was definitely one of the coolest things I had ever heard from Carcinogen SDA when he was discussing small tidbits of information. So that's the main reason why that spider became the giant spider. But I'm just going to pick up the rest of the shotgun shells from this item box over here, and then I'm going to make a save. And also, did you see the empty extinguisher inside of the item box? That extinguisher is actually going to help you in getting the Magnum. So if you're wondering why the game hasn't discarded the extinguisher, it's because of that. Because in the room where the Magnum is, there's a bunch of fire in the way, and it prevents you from getting to the Magnum. And you'll be able to refill the extinguisher and put out the flames and get the Magnum, which is pretty cool. But that is the end of this video. Stay tuned for the final part where I do the whole entire Antarctic base as Chris. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.